All right, we're live.
Good morning and welcome to MEC's Leadership Mississippi Coffee and Conversation. We are excited to be here today, and I see sunshine. I hope the rest of the state is experiencing sunshine as well. The past few days it was pretty wet. So those gardeners that have learned to garden during the COVID, the rain has been great. I hope everyone is safe and enjoying yourself here in the great state of Mississippi. And if we have Leadership Mississippi alums that are not in the state of Mississippi, we welcome you here with us today. We will be talking about the Michael Jordan docu-series that has been the rave a few weeks. And I think people, I don't know how they forgot how great. I heard so many people say, I forgot how good he really was. And I'm like, how can you forget about number 23? So we're excited. We have our president and CEO of Mississippi Economic Council, Scott Weiler, over there. Say hello. And I know you guys know, what does Scott know about basketball? Because he's a huge baseball fan. But he was also a sports editor, and he loves sports, and he has a great Michael Jordan story. So we're going to hear about that. And we have Dr. Sam Jones. Oh, the list can go on and on and on. I think you played ball overseas, basketball. I heard you were okay. I heard you're all right playing basketball.
I was okay. You know, I was good enough to kind of keep it all moving forward and barely getting it in the basket. So
look, so we're excited. We're excited about this today. And you're like, docu-series, Leadership Mississippi MEC. We had some pretty strong leadership stories in that docu-series, but we're going to talk about that later because we've been talking about so many lessons, but we have only an hour to talk about it. So I am going to. You've heard Scott he's an author. He was a Leadership Mississippi alumni. He's a speaker from all over the place. He played ball in Finland, Southern Miss to the top. I think you are, got an honor or two there. If you need him to speak, motivational and all of that. And look, he's even a pastor, and he prays for me sometimes because I say, Sam, I need your prayers. I need your prayers. So he does all of it. So, Scott said, yeah, she needs your prayers. So we're a coffee and conversation today. We're going to have a little fun. And look, disclaimer, basketball is my favorite sport. Do I have a favorite team? No, I just like the adrenaline, the excitement. And it's a pretty simple game to watch. And you find yourself, I feel like I'm working out when I'm watching because I'm running down the court with them. And I am rocking the red and black for Michael Jordan today. I had to represent. But let's talk about coffee and conversation. Scott, you want to go first? Do you have your coffee today, or are you drinking coffee this morning?
I'm drinking coffee this morning. I have my cup that actually was given to me. I've got a couple of dogs. Both of them are mutt dogs, rescue dogs. I firmly believe in that. And this is, since he's not a specific breed, this is one of the closest ones I've ever had that actually had it looked like him. So I did it. But more importantly, on the backside is the doghouse, which is where I stay most of the time. So I thought that was very appropriate.
I like that. For a second, I was like, wait a minute, you don't have a bulldog? But look, we're gonna give it another name other than mutt dog, because I know that's a part of the family. Those dogs are a part of the family, been there around for a while.
I love my mutts now.
What do you have down there, Sam Jones?
So I have probably my favorite coffee mug of all time. It's the state of Mississippi. I can't remember where I got this as a gift, but it's my favorite cup because it's pretty deep, and I'm able to get a lot of coffee in it and keep it warm. So yeah, excited to be here this morning.
Oh, good. You said it's pretty deep. What they say, that song "Still Waters Run Deep." So look,
that's right.
we're gonna take it there. So my cup today is. So I have 3 kids, and my oldest is 25, and he came around. He was, Michael Jordan in Space Jam. He had a Toon Squad jersey with Tasmanian Devil on it. And I tried to hide that jersey all the time, and I put it in the dirty clothes. But he found that Toon Squad jersey with Taz on it and wore it every day. You talk about pick your battles. And I think for Christmas a few years ago, I found him a Toon Squad jersey, and he's still a big kid. So my cup today is Space Jam. I have a Space Jam cup, and it has all the Toon Squad, and it's kind of old. You see the little chip on it, but look, Space Jam, I have some fond memories watching Michael Jordan play with bugs, and I felt like I needed to represent today. My kids call me, say I'm a little extra, but I said, hey, I have my Space Jam cup. I'm going to be extra today with this docu series. So I don't know, where do we start? When we were talking about the quotes, and one of my favorite quotes when they were talking about his gambling, Michael Jordan's gambling, he said, Michael, do you think you have a gambling problem? I said, no, don't have a gambling problem. I enjoy gambling. I have a competition problem. And I was like, pretty interesting. And so we're going to start off by talking about, before we talk about competition and can competition be a problem, can we talk about like our Michael Jordan stories? Everybody has one. Scott, tell us about your Michael Jordan story, because it was pretty interesting. And then we're going to talk about this competition thing.
Well, and you mentioned after I told you this the first time, there's even leadership things in this story on both sides of how he approached it, how he persisted, I guess, to a certain degree. But early in my career, as you mentioned, I was a sports writer. That's what got me started, and I had the opportunity to be sports editor at the Island Packet newspaper in Hilton Head Island, South Carolina. And anyone who's ever been to Hilton Head knows there's only two sports on the island. That's golf and tennis. The other stuff, we covered, but it just wasn't the same because there's all types of professional golf tournaments come in, including the PGA Tour. Same at the time. Same with the tennis. But as a result of that, you get a lot of people through the island, and they have a lot of charity events. And one of the biggest that was held every year was an event that was put on by Lee Elder. Lee was one of the very first African Americans on the PGA Tour, and he brought in a lot of celebrities. And in 1988, the year that I was covering it, Michael Jordan was one of the celebrities. He had just won the MVP. He was a superstar at that point. He was not the icon he is today, but he was still, a big deal. So we go out to cover the event. There's myself, a couple of television stations from the area, newspapers from Savannah and Charleston. We're all there trying to get an interview with Michael. And he finishes number 9 and is starting to make the turn. And we go over to talk to him, and he says, guys, look, I'm happy to talk with you, but I'm really trying to concentrate on playing right now. I will give y'all 10 minutes. When I finish my round, just meet me at the 18th green. So it wasn't a very fast-paced golf tournament. It was a scramble, so they played very slow. But I stayed. And time kind of rocked on. A lot of my counterparts in the industry had to get back to the office to prepare their newscast or write their story for deadline. Fortunately, our paper at the time did not have a Saturday paper. This was on a Friday afternoon. I was able to stay without any time constraint. But I stayed because I really wanted to have the opportunity to visit with him. So he finishes his round. He looks over and he sees just me standing there next to the cart path. He pulls his cart over and he says, where'd everybody go? I said, well, I think they had deadlines. They had to leave. I said, but I really would like a few minutes if you would. He said, jump in my cart. Let's ride over to my car. So we got in the cart, went to the other side of the clubhouse where nobody was. We stood there for about 20, 25 minutes, just talking. And we talked about you talked about his competitive spirit, Kathy, how competitive he was on the golf course and how he wanted to be as good as he could be. And in fact, he said, look, I don't ever intend to not be doing something athletically. And I see myself one day probably trying to make the senior, it's called the senior tour at that time, now it's the Champions Tour, trying to make the Champions Tour. So that was really the story about, could Michael Jordan be a two-sport athlete? Now, the interesting thing was that was about 4 years before the baseball break that he took. But it just kind of showed how he was thinking, what he was doing. And it was just such an interesting conversation. And of course, as a very young sports writer at the time, I mean, I guess I say that he and I are the same age, but I had only been out of school for 2 or 3 years at that point. Was still fairly new, and it was probably one of the highlights of my career in sports, in covering sports, to have that type of one-on-one conversation with somebody who at that point was really considered the up-and-coming best player who then became a legend, and now maybe considered by most the greatest of all time in the sport of basketball. So it was just a fun opportunity to do that. It's just something I will always remember, and just appreciate the fact that he was willing to stick to his word. He said I'll give y'all some time when I finish, and even though everybody else had to leave, I was lucky enough that I got to stay and get that time.
And Sam, I see you shaking your head like, yep, yep. I think when Scott and I we were talking about it, and I was like, just to keep your word. And sometimes we're so tired, and we're like, oh, they're not going to be there. They forgot I said it. So, I'm Michael Jordan. I don't have to go there. So he kept his word. And as leaders, sometimes we get so caught up in the day-to-day, and we have so many commitments, but you have to keep your word. And you hear people say, well, they'll be okay. They understand you're tired. But yeah, but there's a lot of value in keeping your word. And Scott, you always say when we do go on a tour, you're like, there one chance to have a good opportunity, but you have one chance at an opportunity, but many chances at temptation. So you could have left, but you stayed there. I must admit, at during that time, I probably would be like, look here, Mike, I gotta go. It was great. I'm leaving. I don't know if I would have stayed there, but you stayed there, patience.
And I wasn't about to let that opportunity slip away. I mean, I just, it just wasn't, because I knew I would never have that opportunity. And it was key to do that. And it's something I'll always, that's something that can't be taken away. And,
right.
It's a little bitty thing that he would have no clue, as many, but just for me, it's just something that I'll always remember.
Good deal. So, Sam, what are you thinking about over there?
Well, I guess I was just thinking about my first kind of exposure to Michael Jordan is when I was probably about 11 or 12 years old. I was playing basketball, but I really didn't follow the NBA like I did once I began to seriously start being a basketball player. But I can just remember his rookie year in the NBA, and that transition from winning the national championship, and then all of a sudden he comes on the scene and like this culture shift with the Air Jordans. And my biggest memories about that is I had always wanted a pair of Air Jordans, and being raised by my grandmother, who at that time we didn't have a lot of money, and I think a pair of shoes at that time came out like $100, which was a lot of money. I was ragging my grandmother to buy me a pair of Air Jordans, and she was saying there's no way I'm paying $100 for those shoes. But for me, I think the lesson is to be able to look at somebody and kind of chart their career and how hard they worked. And I always tried every move that he was doing. I saw him in the game. My room was filled with posters with him on the wall where he was winning the dunk contest. And so it just brings back so many memories of me finding someone, at that time, a hero, right, to look up to and idolize my life after. So from a basketball standpoint, that's what I did. I mean, I looked at him as here, and everything that I saw him do, I wanted to do it. And so I look at it from a leadership standpoint, that as leaders, are we doing things that to make other people want to follow us and not idolize us, but maybe idolize what we're doing to duplicate what we're doing. So that's kind of what I remember.
I think, when you were talking about that, and they say success leaves clues, so you're like watching and emulating, and we laugh all the time. We're Leadership Mississippi together. I call you my younger big brother, my big little brother, because you're much taller than I am and, larger than life, but I'm older than you. So I was a little bit older than 11. And I remember talking, I moved to LA in middle school, and I had a friend that stayed around the corner where her sister moved in to California to stay with her grandmother, and they were from Chicago. Didn't know much about Michael Jordan, who he was. She had this life-size poster of Michael Jordan on her wall, and he's holding the ball. And a young girl, and you walk in, middle school girl, and you see this tall, dark, and handsome man on the wall. And every time I go over her house, I think she thought I was coming to see her, but I wanted to see Michael Jordan on that poster. And I would talk to Michael. I'm like, hey, Michael, and I felt like he was talking back to me. But that was my Michael Jordan story. And I was like, who is this guy? And she's like, that's Michael Jordan. So she had a connection to Michael Jordan. And, when you're in LA, you're supposed to have a connection to the Lakers.
That's right. And Magic. And
Magic. But who this dude on this life-size poster with this red and black jersey on? It was Michael Jordan. And that was my experience. So competition. He said, I do not have a problem with gambling. I have a problem with competition. So what do you think about that? Do you think, is competition a good thing? Is it something that should drive you? Can it turn bad? Or Sam, tell us what you think about this competition thing. You were in the midst of competition.
Right, and I think competition it's a great thing, but it depends on how you use it and who you become because of it. I think Mike now realizes how he wanted to win at all costs, and there's nothing wrong with that, but also at the cost of you can damage people. And I think some of his former teammates, they realized, like, man, he was a hard guy and he drove you, but he made you become your best. But on the flip side, some people maybe didn't respond well to that. And so I think we have to remember, as leaders, it's important to have the goals and the things we want to accomplish, but we're still dealing with people. And but of course, Mike wanted to win, and we all want to win, and we all want to be a part of organizations that win. But I think we have to remember that we're still always dealing with people, and we can never forget that.
So how do you groom us to do that? How do you groom the leaders to say, okay, this is one thing, this competition thing, and beat out the competition, but at the same time think of the human side of things. And Scott, I want you to be thinking about that, because I'm gonna come to you next.
Yeah, I think the first thing is I think there was a couple of stories, like, for example, it was one practice he and Steve Kerr got into it, and Steve Kerr recognized how Mike was seen as like a bully, but Steve Kerr, he eventually stood up to Mike, and Mike respected him more because he stood up. And so I think as people who are in positions, if you have a leader that is driving you hard because they want results and they want to win, it's important that you eventually raise the bar, right, step up to the plate and not just be run over. And so I think Mike respected more of his players that stood up to him, rather than the ones that were silent and just, like, talking behind his back. And so one story I remember in one of the episodes where his rookie year in the NBA, and Mike said the first couple of weeks he wanted to identify who was the leader of the team. And Mike said he recognized he was a rookie. He didn't have any clout. He said he was going to let his player on the court speak for him. He said, I was going to go after the leader. And Mike, from the start, he wanted everybody to know that he was the best player, but he didn't come in talking a lot of, talking trash. He came in letting his actions speak for himself. And so I think as leaders, we have to bring out the best in our teammates. And a lot of times they have to see us willing to make sacrifices and put it all in. And so from a competitive standpoint, I think we can use it from that standpoint to bring the best out of our teammates. And so I think that's really, really important.
Okay, we're look. I want to talk about that, and put it. I'm gonna write in a note. Pippen. I want to talk about bringing the best out in them, and we're gonna transition to Pippen. And I know Rodman was next on the line, but we got so much to talk about with that Rodman guy. So, Scott, tell us, what do you think about this competition thing and how you kind of have to balance it?
You have to balance it, but one of the things that caught my attention on how you, in addition to being competitive, you have to know your competition. You have to know what you're up against. That allows you to then approach it in a way where you can still, as Sam said, be respectful to who they are, but by the same time to understand what you're up against. And what stood out to me when he was filming Space Jam, they and Kathy, as you know, we have sons the same age, so we had, Space Jam was played a lot at my house as well. When he was there, he did not want to lose his edge. So Warner Brothers actually set up a basically a full court, weight room, the whole 9 yards, and really gave him a place to play. But what was interesting is he invited all these people to come and be part of that. And that's where he kind of got a chance to see how Kobe Bryant played, how some of these young people in the league played. And it allowed him the opportunity to see what his competition was going to be. And that gave him the ability to then, okay, when we're playing the Lakers, I know I've got to deal with this, or when we're playing another team, I've got to deal with that. And they said some of those games got really competitive. It was 5-on-5, 1-on-1. They'd play into the night. But, at the end of the day, it was a lot of fun to do that. But it showed him sitting under the goal one time just watching everybody play, and he was taking it all in on what they did. And so when you think about it, you want to drive, you want to know your competition, you want to know what you're up against, but it also allows you to create that camaraderie of the competition. Quick story, this is a true story. Yesterday I was sitting at the Capitol, and one of the other lobbyists came up and sat down with me. We're just sitting there talking, and he has an intern working for him, and he said, look,
Says Scott and I go way back. Says we were on the opposite side of an issue the first time we ever met. I said, but what did we do? We sat down and talked it out. We tried to see what were the common grounds to get to a point where we both could walk away with something successful. And we eventually got there. But it just, the thing is, understanding where you're going with your competition. And yes, you want to win. And sometimes you can't always have that friendly conversation. But every time you can, it puts you a little bit further in a position to be successful, but also be respected.
Thank you. So when I speak a lot, that makes a lot of sense because you can be on different sides and compete, but still have a common goal. And I think we're dealing with a lot of that now with what's going on with the economy, what's going on in the world, that we're going to have to at some point meet somewhere to get this done. So the Northington family is pretty competitive. And so we had a basketball goal outside, and with 3 kids, there's some that don't like tomatoes, some that don't like chicken, it's always something. And I said, okay, it's a Friday. What are we going to eat for dinner? And one person said one thing, one person said another, and one person said another. So I said, okay, we're going to settle this on the basketball court in the garage, in the driveway. So we go outside, everybody put on their shoes. They weren't Jordans, by the way. I think Corlin may have had Jordans. No one else cared about Jordan shoes. And so we're all outside and said, okay, first person to get to 10 first, they're gonna choose what we're eating for dinner. So it was Corlin. Matt said, whatever they decide, I'm fine. So it's Corlin and Jordan. And she's 4 years younger, but she's not going to give up. She's going to go all in. She doesn't care if it's a boy. So they're going, and Corlin hits one, Jordan hits one, Corlin hits 2, Jordan hits 2, and they're going. And we're down to the very end. And she's pulling out everything she has. And she goes up to hit the shot, and Corlin comes down on her, knocks down her hand. She falls on her arm, and she's balled up crying. And he said, I won. We're eating chicken. And I said, your sister's on the ground crying, may have a broken arm, and you want to win so you can pick chicken. And so I said, it's not always about winning. And he was like, well, you said whoever wins can pick. And so it's the competition. I had to teach him, okay, yeah, it's fine. We can eat chicken anytime, but not at the risk of hurting someone else. And so I laugh about that all the time. And needless to say, the basketball goal is gone. After they tore it up, I decided I did not want to pay for surgery and have competition on what we're going to eat for dinner on the basketball court. So that is, we do that all the time, and we sometimes get lost in the competition. Sometimes it drives you, but sometimes you have to sit back and kind of evaluate it. I hold these personalities on these teams. We talk about teams, and we talk about building teams and the importance of building teams. Can we talk about Pippen for a little bit? We were talking about this, and I was like, I felt sorry for him. So, I loved him, and I felt bad for him, and then I loved him again, and I was like, can you guys help your teammate out? He's struggling here. You guys are killing it, making all this money. Everybody knew it wasn't fair. Why didn't anyone help Pippen? And then I was thinking, when Pippen came in and he said, I'm going to be better than this Michael Jordan guy. He had an ego. He was confident. He had an ego this big, and then as soon as he got a dose of the Jordan, he kind of depleted. So there's so many. My energy level watching him was like, oh my goodness. So talk about that. What do we want to talk about first? We want to talk about how you go into a situation confident, and how can someone like a Michael Jordan deplete you, or how can you build on that energy instead of falling and, feeling like you're neutralized? How can you gain strength from that energy that he was pulling off? Because my goodness, he was full of it.
Kathy, I think, and I can relate to Pippen's standpoint to some extent. So let me just share this. So my freshman year at Southern Miss playing basketball, I can remember the first couple of weeks of us working out and practicing. I came in with this mindset that I am the man. I'm the best thing on this team since sliced bread, right? And for about 2 weeks, I was getting my head beat in. I mean, seriously, everybody was bigger, faster, stronger. I mean, and it really affected my confidence the first couple of weeks, to a point to where I really wanted to quit. I wanted to quit the team. I wanted to drop out of college and go back home. But then I just remember words from my grandmother that she told me that anything worth having in life, you're going to have to work for. And so those words kind of resonated with me, and it forced me to kind of get back in there and just work hard and just kind of raise my expectation of who I was, and to kind of respond to what I was doing. And so Pippin's standpoint, I think it happened the same way. He had this mindset that he was going to be better than Mike, but when he got there, he realized, okay, this guy's a real deal. Let me figure out a way that I can play a role on this team. And I think, and that's what Mike needed. He was the best thing on the team, but Mike needed people on the team to play different roles. And once they were confident in those roles, then he were able to really trust in them. And so I think Pippin, and over time, I think he eventually found his way, but he had a lot of ups and downs in there. And so as leaders, we may walk into situations to where we think we are ready and prepared, all of a sudden realize that we are not. And then we just need to respond to what are the expectations to the team or the incident that we're responding to. So I think Pippin, I think he eventually raised the bar.
He did. Scott, what are your...
No, I agree. And I think when you think about the way he played, the role he played, and I'm sorry I can't remember who they were playing, but it was later in the series, later in his career, where he was having back spasms throughout the game.
Utah
Jazz. They would basically take him into... Who were they against?
Utah Jazz. I think it was the NBA Finals, yeah.
So they would take him into the locker room for like 5-10 minutes at a time, and he'd come back out and play for 10 minutes at a time. And he said afterwards, they were asking him, were you just a decoy? He says, that was a decoy the whole game. But, he actually played well. He gave them what they needed. Without him on the court, they would not have been successful. So he understood that even though he was in pain in that situation, and he wasn't Michael Jordan, he wasn't he had a role to play to help his team win. And I think that's something that stood out to me. That I'm like you. Watching the series, Kathy, from the beginning, I'm like, Scottie Pippen. I've got a new respect for him because I really didn't know that much about him because he did play in the shadows of greatness. But when you think about how he played and what he did, and then the sacrifices, there were some times that he struggled. There were a couple of instances where they pointed out that he didn't do that. But at the end of the day, when it really mattered, I think he had figured out, okay, I've got a role to play. Let me see how I can do it, and I want to make sure my team wins, and I'm there for everybody else. I think that's what stands out to me about the way he adapted in his role.
He was a steady. He was there. He didn't, a lot say, well, he wasn't a superstar. He was a superstar in his own right. He had a strength, and he had things too that could, add to making Michael Jordan even better, to protect him, because they knew Michael Jordan's game, and they said, look, if he gets off the ground, it's over. We can't control him. And so they wanted to devour him. So Pippen was there like, let me help my guy out, because they want to hurt him. I mean, we learned that with the Pistons, and I must admit, as a young girl, I love me some Isaiah Thomas. But after this series, I was like, you know what, Isaiah, you are not my friend anymore. I don't love you like I did. Didn't want the bad boys. I was like, he was just mean. But we're gonna talk about Isaiah too. But Pippen was a strength. Let's talk about this deal. He went into the league, and he had to take care of his family. He had to he said he didn't want to risk not being able to take care of his family. We think about that and how you never know what's going on in the background. You see this larger than life, and you're saying, why did you take a bad deal like that? Why did you do this? Why couldn't you have done this? I would have done that. But you never know what's in the background. My story is different than yours. Scott's story is different than mine. So it's so easy for people to say what Pippen could have done. But me, I was like, you guys speak up for this guy. Michael can't, this is your guy. Can you give him a little bit of, come on, crowds, come on. Can we give him a little, why didn't they do that? Can you help me out? Why did they help him get more money?
Yeah, Kathy, like I said, from a professional athlete standpoint, that is one thing that it's an unwritten, unspoken code that professional athletes have, is that I will not get into any type of financial negotiations with my teammate. That is their thing. They know, they recognize it's business. And so on that level, that's that mutual respect that all professional athletes have about each other. And I think, Mike was like, you know what, I have to look out for me and you have to look out for you. And that's kind of the way that is on that professional level,
How
unfortunately.
can we, how can, I don't know. And I remember on one of the interviews, he was saying, they were asking about Pippen. What do you think about this? And he was like, hey, you want to talk about the game or you want to talk about Pippen? And so he's like, let's just cut this off. I am not going to have all these conversations about what Pittman is doing wrong. If you want to talk about the goal at hand, this game, let's talk about that. But let's not talk about it. So you talked about that, and when you talked about financials, and when Jordan was like, let's cut this off. So how does that translate in the work world? I think so often you have people talking about the money. Well, this person is making this, and this person should make this, or instead of talking about the goal at hand, they talk about the person. So how do you guys think that translates into the work world, and how can we take this in the sports arena and the lessons that we learn and put that in the business world?
Well, I think for me, as leaders, as a leader, and especially in the work that I do with consulting and training and working with different organizations, there's always a lot of issues that anyone likes to bring to the forefront. And sometimes those issues are not relevant to what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think most of the professional athletes, and Mike recognizes this as well, is that from the media standpoint, they're just looking for something to make a story about. And that's their job. And you have to appreciate and respect that. But as the one who is in the arena, you have a responsibility because your teammates, right? You don't want to use the media to pinpoint any flaws that they have. You want to use the media to focus on this goal, that as a team, this is what you're working on and this is what you're trying to accomplish. So I think teammates realize that they have to stand up for each other on different fronts. But when it comes into either finances or family and things of that nature, that is something you definitely don't cross over into, you don't touch. And I think as leaders, we have to remember that, and because your words are really, really important. And you never want to use that vehicle to downplay anything that one of your fellow teammates are doing.
Okay, Scott, you want to touch on that a little bit? You have anything on that front?
No, I think Sam kind of touched on it. I think what you have to do is you have to remember the goal at hand, and what your role is in the goal at hand. And sometimes we're human. We cannot avoid the human aspect. And if someone's hurting or something's going on, you want to try to figure out, hey, what is it that I can do to help? But there's only so much that can be done on that front. And at the end of the day, you got to be there for them to support them in their role that they're in your organization. And I think that's where you come in. And then the otherwise it becomes a distraction, becomes a problem, and you're not able to reach your end goal.
Okay. So, is there anything else before we move on to this character, Rock? Is there anything else you guys want to touch on Pippen and what you guys saw in his character and his role on the team and just him, period?
I'll just say, as you listen to his comments today, when they were interviewing him, to me, he seemed at peace with everything. He really felt. I think if you listen to him, you have a lot more respect that with everything that he went through, he was still kind of that Scotty that we saw coming out of Central Arkansas. That you thought, hey, this is a really nice guy. At the end of the series, you still felt like that was a really nice guy. I think that's what I took away.
And Kathy, I would add this. I think Michael Jordan said it. Excuse me. He said, even as the greatest player of all time, he kept mentioning Scotty, and he said, without Scotty, there's no way I would have had the success I've had. And so he said that Scottie Pippen was the best teammate of all time. And so if you can hear the greatest player of all time say that he had the best teammate of all time, I think that says it all for me.
It does. And so that was the thing. I was like, Scotty had a dad that was in a wheelchair. He had a brother that was in a wheelchair. And he had to take care of his family. And so there's just so much going on with that. And even at the end when Michael, had to get away for a second and he played baseball and there was music, he was coming back. Pippen was at the game, had showed the bottom of the shoe, was like, he's here for you. We'll take you back. And so He wanted his friend back. He wanted his teammate back. He wanted to win games, and he knew. He put, egos aside, put all of it aside, and said, "Hey, we're back." So we talked about competition. We talked about Pippen. We talked about teams and the strength that Pippen was. Let's talk about this Rodman. Rodman was a wild child. He just needed to be him, and he didn't care. And there's something to be said about that energy, but at the same time, you're like, okay, calm it down a little bit, Rodman. You guys, let's talk about Rodman and the leadership in that. What leadership lessons do you see in that whole Rodman thing? I mean, there's so many.
Kathy, I think there's so many. For me, there are two things. I think number one, Dennis Rodman showed, and I think this is why so many people had issues with him. Dennis Rodman had the ability to have a free spirit. And now that means different things to a lot of different people. But if you truly look at his life and his lifestyle, he was truly free. He was not bound by how people think about him, what they thought about him, etc. But that also came from some areas in his life to where, he was overcompensating for us. So I think that's important. So the first thing is his freedom. And then the second thing is from Rodman is, his standpoint to take something that you're good at and become great at it. He was known as a defensive rebounder. That was it. That was all. And if he scored 5 or 6 points, hey, that was icing on the cake. But he focused on being the best defensive player in the rebounder that every team that he played on. So, it's easy to kind of look at his life and take the tattoos and the hair colors and all of these things. That's easy for everybody to see. But when you're in the arena with him and recognizing that, hey, I got to go against this guy, you know you're going to have a battle. And he brought it every single night, even though he may have been partying all night before.
I was like,
he'd show up ready to play. Yeah.
Robin said, I just want to go to Vegas. Can I just go to Vegas?
A couple of things stood out to me, and one of them Sam has touched on. But yes, early on, he realized he was not going to be that offensive star. So he did everything possible. You mentioned this yesterday, Sam, when we were talking, the fact that, he would work late into the night with players, watching their move to determine, okay, which way is the ball going to go? Which way is, what do I need to be doing to make sure I'm there to be the best defensive player that I can be? And then the second leadership lesson, I think, actually deals with Rodman and his coach. And that's, Phil Jackson understood Rodman. And when Rodman said, I need a break, I need to go away for a couple of days, he allowed that to happen. And when he disappeared at the very end, when he disappeared to go do the WWE wrestling stuff with Hulk Hogan, that would have been, a lot of coaches would have said, I'm done with this guy and all that. But he understood that was just Rodman. He was not going to change that. Putting him on the bench wasn't going to change it. Finding him wasn't going to change it. He was going to do what he wanted to do. But he had the understanding of knowing that when Rodman stepped on the court, that he was going to give every ounce he had to be successful. And I think having the coach be a leader in that role of dealing with a very different type of player was part of what made that successful.
Rob, you're going to say something, Sam?
I was just going to say, I totally agree with that. And even now, you have in different industries, you have people who've been working 30 and 40 years, and you have the millennials coming in who are tech savvy and all well connected. And sometimes you have that struggle with leadership. They're not quite understanding. I don't understand this next generation of employee and worker. But it's important because that's really what Phil Jackson did. He connected with Dennis Rodman on things that they knew. Right, the way Phil Jackson was raised, and he was kind of a rebel because Phil Jackson's parents, if you recall, both of them was in the ministry, and Phil Jackson was like, I just want to play sports. And so he recognized how Rodman was just so different against the norm. And he just wanted to be this free spirit. And I think Phil Jackson saw himself in Rodman. And that's why they were able to really connect. And he really appreciated, and Rodman appreciated that as well.
So we're talking about Phil and Rodman. Let's help us and the listeners think about what type of leader does it take to lead someone like Rodman. And then even for these team members, I mean, he played for the Pistons, the Bad Boys, and one time he could have just killed poor Pippen, and pushed them in, filed them out and knocked them in the audience, and then just unnecessary stuff. So how can you take somebody that was your enemy and then bring them on your team and embrace them as what type of leader or team does take? Because you're like, you tried to kill me. I mean, I know a part of you is like, you know what, I'm going to come down on the elbow with them just a little bit and practice. You have to think about stuff like that. And then, Bill, to manage someone like that and just let them be them. Look, Scott is like, you want to know how that happens, Kathy? I kind of sometimes have to let you be you. So we're going to have to, he's shaking his head like, yeah. So
I sometimes have to let you be you, but we also don't work. We also know when it's time to reel in just a little bit too.
So talk about the type, how it can be sometimes difficult as a leader to allow, certain personalities to come out, and then how the team, how you embrace that and use it as an addition to the team and use it as a, something of value.
Well, I think as a leader, the challenge is to always keep the end goal in mind. And I think even in athletics, sometimes that's why I love athletics as great leadership lessons, because you're going to get bad calls, you're going to turn the ball over, you're going to lose some games, and this is in the course of a season. But if you can keep the end goal lifted above all of the challenges and the adversity, I think, and everybody wants to win. And so if you're part of a team, if we can make a commitment to this thing right here, everything that we deal with throughout the season, we can get through that. Because, if you think about it, at the beginning of that year, the management said, we're busting the team up, this is it. And Phil Jackson always started the season off with some kind of theme that everybody can shoot for. And the last dance was it. And so I think they recognize that there are going to be some ups and downs, going to be some challenges, we're going to lose some games. But if we recognize this is our last time together, our last run, let's kind of elevate that, and we can work through anything else.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. The end goal. Scott, tell us about managing different personalities and those Rotman personalities, Rotman-like personalities.
Well, I mean, you have to understand that everybody has different needs, different things. It kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier. Do people on the staff get into other people's business? Do people on the team get into other people's business? Because everybody's dealing with different things. Everybody has different. So you have to figure out a way to recognize that. But then the second part of that goes back to what Sam said about, generational changes, generational thinking is different. For those of us that maybe have done it a certain way for so long, having the ability to understand that somebody's strengths lie in doing things in a different way. Sometimes it's difficult. I mean, you've heard me say this. I talked about it on the tour. When the older you get, the harder it is to adjust to things, and I'm there. I mean, you can see my hair's already turned gray, and now it's starting to turn loose. So I mean, it's really one of those situations where, we have to take into account what their strengths are, and this kind of goes back to something that I've tried to do throughout my career, and times I've been successful, and times not, is early on when Lou Holtz was coaching. I want to say he may have been at Notre Dame at the time, or must have been Arkansas. But I was listening to an interview where he said, look, if I'm the smartest guy in the room, then I've got a problem. I want my defensive back coach to be the best defensive back coach that there is. And then I want my line coach to be the best line coach. He says, when you bring people in there that have the ability to do the skill that they're brought in to do, you become a leader. And you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to make sure you surround yourself with good people and do a good job. And I think that's how it all came together. And that's what, if you look at that last dance approach that Phil Jackson took, this is our last chance to get this done, guys. Let's work together. Let's make it happen. And there were some bumps in the road in that last season, but they still, at the end of the day, there they were, and they were the team that was going to win.
So it's just so many dynamics. We could go on forever talking about all these stories, but we only have about 15 minutes. But if you want us to do another one, there are sponsorship opportunities. I'll give you my email address, and we will do another one if you sponsor it. So we're talking about the team players and the leaders, and we talked about Phil, we talked about Pittman, we talked about Rodman, we talked about Jordan, and Scott mentioned earlier the management. Let's talk about the poor little guy, Krause. Krause, they gave him such a hard time, right? And so there's always that person, and Krause made a comment that said, the organization win championships, not the people. And I was like, Krause, you cannot say that. So they heard that. And so let's talk about that. But Krause did some interesting things, that people gave him pushback on, but it actually worked. When he brought Phil in, he was an assistant coach, and he brought him in to lead, and he, the other guy, Jordan was like, what are you doing? I like this coach. It's not going to work. But it worked. Boy, did it work. So tell us about, Krause. And he was saying, organization win championships, not the people. And then tell us about this risk that Krause made. And he knew that he was going to have enemies behind it. I mean, who wants Jordan mad at them? I mean, we'll talk about that later when he scored 37 points on the kid in the first quarter. So, but tell us about Krause. What do you think he did? What do you think he did good, and what do you think he did bad, and how could that have been different? How could his narrative change the way the NBA was when the Bulls were?
I think for me, one of the great things that he did is he built a solid structure of support around Michael Jordan. And I think that was one of the biggest rifts that he had with Mike, because in building the team, Michael Jordan was the only piece that was left there after Krause got there. And he started trading Charles Oakley and just kind of building this surrounding cast around Mike, and then bringing the coaching staff in to do that. So number one, I think the good thing that he did that. But on the flip side, I think he was destroying a lot of relationships. Even if you're still winning championships, underneath all of that, he was still destroying relationships. And I think, beyond all of the championships and the champagne, underneath when all that is said and done, what kind of relationship did he still have with management and the players and the coaches? And to me, I think that was the most important thing that he probably failed on. And I think as leaders, we have to recognize that the organizations we work for and the things that we accomplish together, that's all good and dandy. But when we retire, and when your former employees and former colleagues are living life and sick and losing family members, do we have those relationships to still support each other? And to me, I think that's probably where he failed at.
Okay.
And I agree, Sam, that when you think about some of the decisions he made, what sometimes unpopular decisions, to Kathy's point about when he switched coaches, but he had been asking that they run a triangle offense. And they were like, no, I don't want to do that. And it's interesting that, he had been kind of watching Phil Jackson's career and knew what he was doing and knew kind of how he could pull people together. So he had to make a tough call, got rid of a popular coach, particularly with the team, to bring in somebody to run what he thought was going to get them over the top to win championships, and it worked. By the same token, he inserted himself, in my opinion, into it by making statements such as Phil Jackson will not be back as our coach next year. And then, that was the plan. He wasn't supposed to come back for that season where they were the last dance, their final season. And Reinsdorf, the owner, worked with him all season, got him on a one-year contract. And then the minute that happened, Krause inserted himself and said, okay, well, this is it. This will be his last year. And I think that's where he was kind of had that he didn't have the ability to step away from the spotlight. Once he created something that was great, he still wanted to be right in the middle of it. And sometimes you have to step back and let those around you do what they do best. And that's where he missed it, and as a result created a lot of controversy and chaos heading into that final season.
I think Krause, and he just didn't care. Or did he care? And sometimes, we all can't be superstars. It's just not possible. we can be in our own right. I mean, we all bring something different to the table. And Krause's role was to build a strong team, and he did it. But at the same time, he was building a strong team, but at the same time destroying it. So, Krause. So, goodness, we have 10 minutes. Mental strength. We're talking about Michael Jordan, his mental strength, and how he would put something in his head that had nothing to do with anything. Like, can't help me. The guy, he's like, did the guy actually say that to you? Good game? And he's like, nah, he didn't say it. And I was like, Michael. Or, my good friend and General Collins, the leadership alum, he would talk about the spotlight and how be careful when that ego gets so big and you want to be in the spotlight, because that light is hot. And when it's hot, you got to be ready to deal with it. And the kid played against Jordan, and he scored 37 points, and he was like, I'm going to get him. And when he scored those 37 points, he antagonized him. He looked at the line, he looked at the bench, and he was like, I got him. And he was excited, and he was in the spotlight. Of course, the cameras was looking for him. They was looking for him, and he was making face, all these gestures, and that was his highlight. And Michael Jordan just sat around and let him do it. And so he gets into the locker room. And if you haven't watched it, I'm just so excited about this. I'm sorry, I love the show. He was in the locker room, and he was, smoking a cigar. And the guy said, are you mad? And he was like, mad for what? Why am I mad? He was like, 37 points. He was like, that's not. And so Michael Jordan had to put that in his head, what was to help him get over that hump and to win. And Michael Jordan said, I'm going to score in the first half what he scored on me in a whole game. And he did it. And the poor kid he was just depleted. And I'm like, Michael Jordan, you didn't have to kill him like that. And that's when we get to that competition thing. And so tell us about that spotlight and how so often we get things and we want to, get in the spotlight and say, this is me, and how sometimes when you do that, you attack yourself. And how do you stay humble during those times? And let's talk about this mental strength too. How do you stay humble when you're in the spotlight? So, because it's hot out there. And then also talk about this mental strength. Tell us about your mental strength when you're trying to get over a hump. What do you do to pour into you to make you achieve what you need to achieve?
I think the biggest thing, Kathy, is, and I think those two go right together. Number one, being in the spotlight and recognizing that it demands something of you. But on the flip side, you have to have that mental capacity to be able to deal with it and handle it. Watching this docu-series, it really, the biggest lesson I got from Michael Jordan was the fact that he was able to tell himself a story, create a story in his mind to make him respond and raise up his level, his excellence, whatever you want to call it. But that's what he was doing. I know as leaders, sometimes we tell ourselves these stories that because we don't have more technology or more money or more employees or whatever, that this can't be done. And sometimes the people that work with us and work for us, those are the stories that they're telling themselves as well. But Mike showed us that we need to tell ourselves a story to get us to respond, to raise our game. And that's what he was doing. I mean, there are so many stories that somebody said something or did something, and he used that as motivation, as fuel, right? But he wasn't always like that. If you remember when he was cut from his junior varsity team, he went home crying to his mom, and his mom was like, you have a brain, go back and try again and try harder. And so he didn't always have that, but he learned that over his career and over time. And I think as leaders, that is definitely something we need to be able to apply in our life and our organizations, because there are some challenges out there, but we have to keep telling ourselves a story that's going to help us respond. So
when you mentioned that and talking about his mother and how she said keep going, and even with that it was competition, because he wanted to go in and he didn't want to be in his brother's shadow. He wanted to be better than. And so she said, okay, we'll do it again next year. So she said every day that summer he was practicing and practicing and practicing, instead of being in the shadow of saying, well, that's not fair, they didn't pick me, or that's not fair, I could have done that. He was like, okay, what can I do to make myself better, instead of complaining about what they did to not make me better, because hey, I am that person, right? And also when the Pistons tore them down, and after that, and they lost, they could have pouted. They could have cried. And he said he did cry. He said, I cried because I was hurt. And he said they could have partied because the season was over. But what did they do? They went into the gym. And they did what they needed to do to make themselves better. And you can talk about all day long. And Pittman did it in one of the games. Don't complain. Don't let them see you sweat. Don't let Rodman see that he tore your shoulder off. You hold your head up and you get in the game. And he said he knew then they were going to be okay because Pittman said, look, that didn't hurt me. It's just going to build me up and make me stronger. And that's what they did. So, Scott, tell us about that.
And I think it comes back to, you talk about, you can't back down. But the way you do it sometimes is what matters. In the case where, basically Rodman, fouled Pippen so hard he went into the crowd, he didn't get up to fight. He just got up and said, I'm okay. I'm going to play. And I think where Jordan, going back to some of the things Sam said about Jordan finding things to motivate him, even when he was making up stories, a lot of times he didn't have to make up the stories. And to me, the lesson is what the other person did. And, right after he came back from baseball, he was wearing number 45 instead of number 23. And he had a bad game. And one of the players on the other team said, 45 ain't 23. And he came back out in 23 the next game. And one of his teammates said, or on several occasions, his teammates said, don't make him mad. That's the last thing you want to do is make him mad, because he's going to come back and basically, just like the guy who scored 37 on him, he wanted to score 37 in the first half. But what the lesson to me is, those guys that had the opportunity, when they got the best of them, when they had a better game, it was, how do you respond to that? Do you stand at the camera and you make faces and you point and you do all that and put all the attention on you? Or do you have a good game and then come out and try to have a good game the next time? And I think that's where a lot of times it's hard to not let our egos get in the way of, I just did this and I just did that. Because if you're not careful, you're going to get knocked down real quick the next time you go out. And I think that's what you've got to remember is win with humility, win with grace, and know that the next time you play, you're going to have to play twice as hard if you think you're going to win that time. So I think that's where those lessons, it all comes back to what you said when we started our conversation, Kathy. He was so intense and so competitive that he would always find something to motivate him. And I think what you take from that is, in many cases, you may not be as good, and you may not be, but if you find a way to motivate yourself and surround yourself with the right people and let them do what they're supposed to do, that's when you begin to find success.
Thank you. So, look, we're down to the very end, and I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as I have. This is pretty interesting, pretty fun. We didn't have much time for questions, but we're going to close out. I will go online. We're going to put a link up later on with this video, with this recording, and we're going to put a link up. If you have any questions for Sam or for Scott or for me that you couldn't get here, send them to us, and we'll try to get it to you the best we can. And aren't you happy Michael Jordan got rid of that 45 number? 23 sounds so much better. It has a different ring to it. I'm just saying, I don't think 45 would look good on a pair of Jordans. I like the way 23 looks. It has been great. It's a great docu-series. If you have not watched it, please watch. Sam's like, I have something to say. We're going to close you out. We're going to let you close us out, Sam. It has been great. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Give us a few hours. We're going to have this recording live. And I think Sam has some that he's doing on YouTube. Can you talk a little bit about that when you close us out? And this has been great. Enjoy the sunshine. Enjoy the day. Send us emails, anything that you have questions on, even if it's not about this, something that MEC is doing or you want MEC to do, or you just want input on it. We are here for you, the voice of business. We're the resource. Leadership Mississippi, alumni, current class, thank you. Sam, close us out. What you have for us?
I will. Thank you, Kat, and I will say this. So I have a couple of episodes on YouTube called First Steps After the Last Dance, and I put together some leadership lessons from each of the episodes. And I did that to kind of give us all some lessons that we can apply in life. But I wanted to end with this one, Kathy, because I think this is really what we need right now. So one of the greatest lessons I got from the docu-series is be willing to call out your best player. And I got that lesson from Phil Jackson when they won their first championship against the Lakers. In the fourth quarter, I think the Bulls were down, and they called timeout. And Phil Jackson looked at Mike and said, "Mike, why aren't you passing the ball? They're double teaming you." And Mike said, "Well, who's open?" He said, "John Paxson is open." And Mike was like, Phil Jackson was like, "Well, pass him the ball." Mike came down, passed John Paxson the ball. They double teamed him. Paxson hit the shot, and so Mike was like, "Oh, that worked. Let me keep trying that." And so Mike kept trying that, and he kept trying that. And the lesson is, even though Michael Jordan was the best basketball player all time, scoring, doing all these wonderful things, he won his first championship passing the ball. But he needed his coach to call him out. And so in your organization, if you're the leader, don't be afraid to call out your best players because they need it. Okay? They need it. So, Kathy, this has been an honor. This has been a great conversation. And hopefully we can do it again another time.
Hey, sponsors. Thank you again. You guys.
Sam, thank you, Sam, for all you do.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. You guys have a great day. It was a wonderful coffee and conversation. Good day.